All right. Hello, everyone. Hi, and welcome to our conversation today, The Last Mile. My name is Raylan Musaraka, and I'm an assistant teaching professor at the Human-Computer Interaction Institute here at Carnegie Mellon. I am also one of the faculty leads of ENAiBLE, a retail and services collaborative. We are a joint initiative of CMU School of Computer Science, the Tepper School of Business, and the College of Fine Arts. For those of you who may be new to us, ENAiBLE is a unique forum aimed at the retail and service industries. We look towards meeting the needs of our customers through advances in both design and technology, and our explicit mission is to create more humane, efficient, and positive retail and service experiences by creating a community of conversation across industries and CMU departments. If you want some more information about us, there is more information on our website at cmu.edu/enable. And today for our event, just a couple logistical questions. First, this event is being recorded and it is on the record, and we post these available for use later on our website. And we also encourage you to ask questions. We will have a dedicated Q&A towards the end of the hour, and you can put those questions anytime during the webinar while our panelists are talking in the QA function in Zoom, and then we'll come back to them when we break for the Q&A portion of today's discussion. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into our panel discussion today, the last mile. So for retailers and service providers, the infrastructure and logistics of transportation, particularly transportation in that last mile, create many challenges on two fronts. First, for delivery of products and services, but then also for employees trying to reach work destinations. On the delivery side, consumers expect it faster and more transparent. They want to know exactly when that item is going to be placed at their door. And for employee transportation, individual vehicles actually exacerbate the very same traffic problems that complicate these deliveries. And then, and also in many cities, public transportation systems are just not extensive enough to take employees directly to an employer's door. So these become very complex, multifaceted problems with a lot of stakeholders and a myriad of technologies. And then we have a lot of the talk and the promise of AI, and where does that fall in? And so where do companies start when they start wanting to tackle these challenges? So today we're going to hear from a variety of points of view. Karina Ricks is a partner at Cityfi. Karen Lightman is executive director of Metro 21. And Sarah Fox is a faculty here at the School of Computer Science. And we're going to talk about the pros and cons of rapidly evolving technologies that are touted as the solution for the last mile. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into talking with our panelists. And I think by now we should get moved over to them. So hello, Karina, Karen, and Sarah. I want to thank you very much for preparing for and participating in today's discussion. Before we go ahead and jump into the questions, I do want to give you a few minutes to introduce yourself and your work. So we're going to go ahead and start with Karen.
Great. Hi, Raylan. Thanks for inviting me to be here today. And I'm really thrilled to be with my friends Karina and Sarah as well. And so in terms of introduction, I'm here at Carnegie Mellon. I am the executive director of Metro 21, the Smart Cities Institute. And I also wear another hat, which is the interim executive director of Safety 21, which is our U.S. Department of Transportation National Transportation Center, University Transportation Center. So this issue of transportation mobility, moving people and goods, addressing these last mile challenges is something that I've been working with colleagues to address and try to solve. I have in air quotes for many years, because it's like I call this smart cities work in transportation. It's a multi-headed hydra or a game of whack-a-mole that oftentimes you'll deploy something and then there are all these unintended consequences. So I look forward to having a discussion with my colleagues today. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. And Karina, we'll go to you.
Sure. Thanks, Raylan, for inviting me. Glad to be here. My origin story is actually rooted in community development and economic development. That's where I started my career in Washington, D.C., and in addition to some international NGO work. But eventually, those roads led to transportation, and seeing that it's really hard to achieve economic mobility for individuals, economic success for industry, for business, without really a firm understanding of transportation and the implications of transportation. I've often said before that transportation departments are the single largest economic development department that there are in the city or state, national governments. And so that's sort of where the road has taken me. Professionally, I worked in Washington, D.C., and then came up here to Pittsburgh to run the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. Briefly returned back to D.C. To serve as the Associate Administrator for Innovation with the Federal Transit Administration. And now I'm privileged to work as a partner with Cityfi, which is a consultancy that works across, it's sort of this interstitial space that works between businesses, government, foundations, and others that are trying to really see how technology can serve and advance some of the public good objectives and bring together objectives for innovation with actual execution of innovation and service to the public good. So happy to be here and talk about this.
Thank you, Karina. And Sarah.
Yes. Hi. Thanks, Raylan, for bringing us together in conversation. It's great to see Karen and Karina here as well, and excited for the discussion. I'm a faculty member in the School of Computer Science here at CMU in the Human Computer Interaction Institute. And here I do a number of different projects that kind of touch on related topics. So one of them is on micromobility, and specifically personal delivery devices, or PDDs. And then the other one is focused on the impacts of automation on public transit. And so both of these things kind of speak to the topic for discussion today in different ways. And I'm looking forward to talking about how some of the community-oriented work that we've been doing kind of can inform innovation in this space, and the ways that kind of industry can think about moving forward.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you. So, okay, we're going to jump into our first question. We're going to tackle both delivery and employee transportation today, but we're going to go ahead and jump into delivery first. So it's kind of two questions in one. We're going to start with, what is the role of retail and service providers in supporting innovation in the delivery and public transportation sectors? How do retail and service providers work with these local, state, and federal governments to encourage support of technology startups during areas of exploration? Karina, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Sure. That's a loaded question, and a lot of sub questions involved in that too. But I think where retailers, service providers, employers can start is really to frame the problem, right? We don't do enough kind of design thinking often of really starting with what is the problem that needs to be solved? What are the challenges? What is the user's experience, the journey mapping of that? So where are the pain points that are occurring? What's not working today, and why is it a problem? It's not innovation for innovation's sake. Although there's a lot of cool things that can be done, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're cool things that should be done or that are needed to be done. We have a lot of solutions in search of problems. I think that one thing that the actual end users or the client can do is very clearly articulate, what is the challenge? What is the pain point? What is the point of friction? And how does that affect your bottom line, what you're trying to achieve in terms of the access to opportunity for your employees, in terms of your longevity or just financial strength as a company? so that we can really start to solve those problems with an understanding of the outcomes that you want to see at the end of it. Is that outcome having to do with supply chain? Is the outcome having to do with employee retention? Is the outcome having to do with just your financial solvency? So really, I would start there. That's the first critical role, is to define the problem, so that you can really orient some of these technologies and potential solutions toward that problem, rather than just doing things that you can do.
Thank you, Karina. Sarah, Karen, I'll just let one of you jump in, add on to that.
Yeah, I'll add on. I feel like we're being really polite with each other. So I agree. I agree with a lot of what Karina said, and another issue to consider is the policies. Like oftentimes, from a municipal policy side, there's often, there's rules, and there are ways that we do things here, and the ways it's always been done, and then there's procurement and policies. And so I think that's another challenge. And so being able to do, I mean, pilot projects sometimes get like a nasty, some people don't like pilots, but I'm a big fan of betas, or whatever you want to call it, and trying something out. And because oftentimes it's these unintended consequences that you didn't think about. I have so many examples of projects where we had these intentions, and then we did a rollout, and a lot of things happened that we did not expect. And then at the same time, we didn't realize that there were policies and procedures and procurement that were going to hinder us from going beyond just a beta, from like one city block or one neighborhood, if we wanted to expand it widely. So I'm a big fan of trying things, whatever the expression is, measure twice, cut once. So this idea that if you're doing a last mile, like for example, this is a project that Karina, your old days when you were at the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, with this idea of smart loading zones and being smart about the curb and the use of curb space. And it was a concept that was, again, it was thought up of this idea of an Airbnb for the curb, where those that use the curb for delivery pay for their time on the curb. And then there's also the idea that then if you need time on the curb, that the curb is there for you. And so we're in the process of doing a demonstration project with the city of Pittsburgh. I'm with a team that's being funded by the Department of Energy, because there are climate and emissions issues related to this. And what we're finding is there's just a lot of complications and issues that we did not think of. And that's okay. This is how you learn, and this is how you iterate and you collaborate. And to your point, and you were making, and all of us were making in our introductions, is that collaboration and communication with the people who are involved in the rollout of something, who will be affected, not just maybe primary, but secondary, even tertiary, making sure that you have that opportunity for collaboration during the design of a project, the deployment of a project, and the evaluation of a project. Because if you do that, and you do that on a cycle, then you have a chance for it to change policies, funding, maybe even procurement, and then it can scale. And I think that's one of the challenges that we see, is that you'll have these pilots or betas, and they something goes wrong, and then I call it the baby is thrown out with the bathwater, that the project is killed and you're not learning from it. So my hope is that we keep learning from it and iterate and know and go in with the mindset that as we deploy this solution, there are going to be challenges, and that's okay, and that we're going to work together. But that communication piece with the partners, all the people who are affected, is really important. So I'll stop there. Sarah, I'd love to get your thoughts on this too.
Yeah. Definitely. I think it's important to kind of have really kind of community-centered collaborative process all the way through, not as a kind of tack on at the end, right? And say we got participation done, check. But instead, even in the conceptualization of, say, a pilot project, right? So one of the things that we see in like the PDD space, they initially were designed and rolled out for college campuses. They work really well on college campuses that are pristine, very well maintained sidewalks and things like this. That is not the case for many cities, that it's like that uniform flows of traffic, or that predictable, with changing of class times and schedules like that. The kind of broader context of the city is much less predictable. And there are kind of many more and more diverse types of people who inhabit a city than do a college campus. We know that. So, thinking about the ways that they're kind of rolled out within a college campus setting versus a kind of wider community setting, it's really critical to think about what Karen was saying, those unintended consequences. So when the wheels hit the road and the sidewalk is cracked, or there's snow, the weather conditions matter a lot. Or even smaller things. One of the things that we saw in some of the work that we did on PDD pilots was that local retailers didn't necessarily think about what it would take to transition, and nor did the vendor necessarily think about the work that it would take to make kind of a robot work within their kind of like service flows. So just one example is, and Karina knows this, but it's from like a local drugstore who didn't have a website. So they ended up having to take phone orders like they would do normally, and then enter it into a website that the vendor made for them. And then that eventually went into kind of the ordering system for the autonomous delivery robot. So it created a new set of tasks, so that it made it more onerous rather than less for that particular scenario. And so just thinking about the ways that can plug into existing workflow processes, and just thinking about the kind of whole life cycle of the technology. And so that's something I think it's really important for kind of local retailers and others within a kind of community setting to kind of comment on how it will actually work within the setting environmentally, in terms of kind of weather and sidewalk conditions and so on and so forth, but also kind of socially and for different organizations too. So there's a lot to think about, like the role that retailers could play in terms of informing deployments and even the design of the technology in the first place.
Really, can I jump in again on that? It's just, I do think that there's a role also in sort of the industrial design, or whatever you want to call it. Just the notion of actually observing how some of these technologies are used, and or the expression of desire of how these technologies how they would like to be used. So using the example of the PDD pilot that we did with the pharmacy, there were sort of the workflow, process considerations of, if you don't have a website, how does that, how are you gaining efficiency if you have to go back to sort of the analog system in order to use the digital, technology that's now available? That was a very informative observation. But also things like, you have some older adults ordering eye drop, medication. The PDDs are very short, they're very low. And if you need to bend down, to get these small objects from the inside of them, it's just not, like that industrial design, looking at the edge users, how are they actually interacting with them? The scooters, lots of emotions and feelings about e-scooters, that's fine. But when you actually observe how some people would like to use them, you see an adult riding with a school-aged child, or you see two people. These are not devices that are designed for two people, but you're seeing that in the real world, the observation of how the technology is being used. Can we progress, beyond that of thinking about the industrial design? Can we elevate the PDDs so that people, of different abilities are able to access the contents inside it so that they can get to it? Can we design a wider, safer, more balanced device that, now you could have a parent and child or an adult and child riding on these things. I think that's those real world observations that, again, the employer, the retailer, the commercial establishment, that feedback loop, that sort of agile system or whatever it's, however you want to describe it, those are really important, I think, as we continue to evolve some of these technologies and make sure that it's a more inclusive outcome.
And just to kind of tag onto what both of these guys said, one thing that I think is really important is interoperability. And so if you're thinking about a deployment, we see so much inefficiency. Today it's the holidays. I probably have UPS, Amazon, FedEx, and the post office all making deliveries at certain times, sometimes crossing each other. There's so much inefficiency there's no interoperability. Maybe sometimes with the post service, maybe especially in more rural areas, there might be some more collaboration. But I think that's an opportunity for the retail space to take advantage of that and in a way to preserve their safety, security, their intellectual property, their APIs, all of that. But there's so much inefficiency in last mile delivery of goods already that I think it's ripe for collaboration. I hope, my hope is that it will be self-selected as opposed to imposed. So, but I don't know who's going to lead that. Who's going to make that decision? Who's going to lead? Is it going to be the Walmarts? Like, is it going to be Amazon making these decisions to say, we want to improve efficiency, so we're going to ensure that there is more interoperability at the last mile delivery? Because right now, and technology, I think tools like artificial intelligence, as well as from a software side, and then obviously, like Karina was talking from and Sarah from a hardware side, there's opportunities. So I think it's a combination of software and hardware. I am really fascinated. I go to New York City a lot. I have a kiddo living there. And so I'm always amazed when I go to New York City and seeing how they're making those last mile deliveries. Some poor guy is lugging, it looks like some sort of tractor trailer kind of device that he's hand pulling through the streets of New York City to get to that last mile. That seems so insanely inefficient. But at the same, they can't get to that city block. So and then there's rural areas where there's an exploration of using drones and the like. Right now, there's no governance dictating any of this. There's no interoperability. There's so much inefficiency, packaging, like all of that. I think there's a huge opportunity in the retail space. And I encourage those who are in our audience that have some questions and suggestions. Let's have a conversation about that, because I think there's some good research questions in this too. Oh, good. I see something in the Q&A popping up. So, all right.
Right. So I'm hearing a lot of things, and I want to bring this back to the beginning of the sentence is, what role can retail and service providers play? And I'm hearing a lot of things in this. There might be a tendency for retailers to say, that's the role of my delivery contractor. That's the role. They'll work it out. But I also know that the other stakeholders in this question, right? Local, state, federal governments, limited on funding, have a lot of policy, have a lot of rules that get in the way, right? Technology startups, limited on funding, right? Don't have as many resources. So I think part of this question was also, and I heard a little bit of this when you talked, but I really want to pull that out, is how would you encourage retailers and service providers to get involved in that and to help with that, either policy change or to help with the growth of some of these technologies that could help create better efficiencies in the future? Any one of you can jump in.
I mean, I'll jump in just from the using again the same example of the PDD pilot that we ran now 3 years ago.
Wait, you know what? Can I just make sure we define what PDD stands for?
Oh, yeah.
Personal delivery device. I think, yeah, Sarah mentioned it to begin with. So sidewalk robots, robot beer coolers, as I call them. That's what they look like. But we wanted to understand the use case. We understood that these devices, that the state had made policy changes to enable the arrival of these devices, thanks to some strong advocacy efforts by the logistics and delivery companies. We didn't know how they were going to work on the narrow streets and poor quality sidewalks of Pittsburgh, but we also didn't know what was the actual use case for these things. If you're not Amazon, does anyone want this, right? So, we wanted to run this pilot to understand how it works with small businesses, how it works with other retailers in our community. I will say that one of the first obstacles was finding a retail partner. This was at no cost to them. It was it was a foundation funded demonstration that we were doing. But even finding a retail partner to look at this was difficult. And so, how can they help? Remain, have an open mind, not so open your brains fall out, but have an open mind about technology does exist, technology does evolve, you can shape it or not. But I think that we would prefer that it is shaped by the user. So that is one way that they can help. Again, defining the use case, defining the problem statement, really sharing that lived experience. Okay, I'll stop there. But that was a major hurdle to actually find a partner that we could run a no-cost pilot with.
And I know I did some work related to kind of reconnaissance, if you will, and looking for solutions to solve, honestly. And so my mind went to like when I was a new mom, I feared leaving the house for anything, especially like my first time. I was fearful. I didn't want to drive my car. I thought it was a death trap. I thought for sure. I didn't want to leave the house. And so I was thinking, somebody who has limited mobility and needs resources like maybe diapers, formula. And so, looking at food insecure people with disabilities, like trying to find who would benefit from having a PDD provide something, and it would be, I think the challenge is and what I worry about is oftentimes it is not the same group who would pay and have the resources. So there's an equity issue as well. So from a retailer's point of view, you're for profit, I assume most retailers are. And so you're thinking of who is most in need of a service for this last mile delivery and who is willing to pay for it. I mean, Amazon has its annual fee, so that you have the free delivery, and that opened up a Pandora's box, right? And so now the question is, now it's a Pandora's box that keeps getting further opened, right? One day delivery, same day delivery. And so that is, there's costs involved in all of that. And so it is not an equity issue. And so I think we have, as a society, and if you're setting public policy, there's a question of, are we trying to help those who are the most isolated and the most in need of resources, or are we just going to let it be governed by who's willing to pay? I don't have the answer to that, but I think these are the questions that, as you're setting policy and you're deciding what to do, there are consequences to what you've said. And I don't know how we get back from the 1-day delivery, same day delivery, Pandora's box. My hope is that we can improve efficiency so it can be a more, a wiser allocation of resources. Like I remember long time ago, like my fantasy is that when I'm making my choice of having something delivered, maybe I could bundle it with a neighbor, like maybe there's a way that there's some algorithm in the background that's saying, okay, well, it looks like there's an opportunity to deliver these things and we can just make one more efficient delivery. And so if you choose to be in this, kind of cohort group, you can save emissions and you get a credit. Like I know Amazon is trying to do those kinds of things, but I don't think it's communal. I think it's still based on what they expect in terms of delivery. So I don't know. I think there's opportunities for efficiency because right now it's not efficient. It's not equitable. It's not serving the people who need it the most. So it's kind of doing the antithesis of, I think, maybe as a policy person, your economic community development, it's probably the antithesis of what you would set out to do.
I think as you're talking, one of the things I think about in HCI and user experience to design, we often think about inclusive design, and we think about when you design for the most specific scenario, right? Those that might be more in need, you actually end up creating solutions that are really good for everybody, right? Because you're focusing in, and perhaps maybe there's a similar synergy of when you invest and you create technology, there's actually then greater synergies for everybody that you want to deliver to. At least that would be the argument I would have made when I was working for a retailer, in that's why we would want to invest in pilots of this nature and other programs of this nature. Sarah, did you want to weigh in on this question in terms of audience? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the question of like policy making is an interesting one, just because, the folks who with the PDD legislation, as Karina mentioned, it was kind of lobbied for. There were different versions across the country, meaning there was like kind of model policy that was then kind of taken up and adapted. And ours in Pennsylvania was one of the more, I would say, kind of comprehensive and like logistics management firm friendly. I'd say that, meaning just in like the size and speed that was permitted and things like this. And it raised a lot of questions in the broader community that Domi sought to address with the pilot, just around what this would actually mean in real life, like on our streets. What was permitted was like quite large and quite heavy. What happens if it runs into somebody? Who's liable for that? Like all these kinds of questions came up, and one of the kind of main focus we took up was on the question of accessibility of the sidewalk. So maintaining accessibility on the sidewalk and other kind of pedestrian walkways. And so thinking, yes, about the consumer or end user and retailer as a kind of another kind of consumer if you're a logistics company, but also those who are just like not ever, I mean, they're not even in the kind of pipeline of product, just folks who just happen to be on the sidewalk passing by. And there are various kinds of incidents that we heard about across the country around kind of being blocked from curb cuts or not really being sure just because of how the robot did or didn't communicate, like whether they could pass or pass on the left side. Do they have the same sort of like rules of the road that people do, this kind of thing? And there not being a consistent pattern of communication. So whether it be text-based communication that might kind of tick across the screen, or whether it be kind of announcing their presence as they pass by you, all of these things matter when you, again, kind of have a diverse population in a community with whom these devices would be interacting with. And so a lot of our work focused on the disability advocacy community and just understanding the concerns that they had. We later did interviews with folks with mobility impairments and roboticists to understand how they conceived of accessibility barriers that are posed by the ways that current sidewalk robots are designed. And one of the interesting things was, at least among the kind of roboticists that we interviewed, they said it's not a priority within their organization. It's often like kind of accessibility concerns in terms of the design, just speaking to kind of the industrial design components that Karina was talking about at the beginning. It's usually kind of an afterthought. There's no like standards around like say communication style or physical form. And so it's really like kind of after a controversy or after somebody brings it up late in the game that it gets discussed, and that's not really working. So
Thank you, Sarah. So I think this also leads a little bit to the question that we do have in Q&A. I think I'll ask this question and wrap up the delivery part, so we have a little bit of time to get to employee transportation, which I think is just as critical. So we'll go ahead and ask this question since it's related to delivery, which is, what role does smart city technology play with last mile delivery provider, enabling the providers to do their job safely and efficiently? So I think provider in that context means the person actually in the delivery truck, the person carrying the package, the person bringing that whole trolley in New York City down the street, right? So, and I would actually extend that just beyond the technology to the retailer. Like how should the retailer think about this?
I mean, I'll go for it, and then you all can jump in. So, from a smart city side, ideally, you'd like to have this, system of system, this idea of interoperability and communication. Everything's seamless. Everything's working so well. Everything's communicating to each other. Cars, are driving in their lane. Bikes are in their lane. Pedestrians are in the crosswalk. Everything's humming along beautifully, and that is so not happening in the real world. But that is the vision, like, of this, this operations plan of a smart city, is that everything is going according to plan. In the real world, it's messy. There's snow, there's complications. So safety is my hope is that safety is the #1 priority for ensuring that the driver is behaving in a safe manner and is also being treated safely in a community. In terms of smart city, again, it speaks to that issue of interoperability. It would be great if we could have a system where there was, privacy preserving sensors that were knowing where everything was, and so that there could be that coordination of a delivery system, that delivery people there was a communication of where the delivery stops were. I mean, I know I have had to remove my Google pin so many times because I have many entrances to my home, and it seems to be a complication. Things get delivered to the neighbor. There's a lot of that misinformation. And in a smart cities aspect, ideally you would have perfect information, seamlessly, automatically, cyber secure and safety preserving. And we are so not there, but I think we have an opportunity, technology wise, we have the technology to do a lot of these things. The challenge is it's sometimes like a pick one, like it can be privacy preserving, but it's not intelligent, or it can be really intelligent, but there's no privacy or security. So ideally in a smart cities operation, it's interoperable, because realistically in a city, they're not on the same platform. There's lots of different platforms. So yeah, I think I use smart city a lot of times in air quotes because I frankly don't think it exists. But we have aspects of smart cities technology that we can integrate, and we have an opportunity. The technology's there. It's just more about the execution. So that is my kind of non-answer answer to your question.
Thanks, Karen. Sarah, Karina, do you have anything to add to this, or? No one jumped in. We'll jump to employee transportation then. Okay. I think this is important. Sarah, I think I'll start with you with this because it also revolves a lot about community members. But the question is, scooters, bikes, and other short distance human mobility solutions have complex trade-offs. These are the solutions that employees may use to get to the employer to do their work. They have complex trade-off and often create dissatisfaction among community members who do not need the transportation solutions. How can retail and service providers participate in these programs to help ensure that their employees have these last mile options?
Yeah, in some of the last response that I had, it's really similar in terms of like thinking about how these sorts of technologies, kind of new mobility technologies broadly described, scooters, e-bikes, and other kinds of technologies, how they affect like the kind of broader pedestrian walkway in my mind. So yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are interesting here. So one of them is the kind of parking problem. So I'll just like pick on scooters because the parking problem is really common in the context of scooters, and dockless e-bikes too. But one of the main appeals of scooters is you can kind of pick one up and then drop it off like where you need to go, right? And so it's kind of door to door. It really fills that last mile gap. And that's really, really appealing to folks who might be users, but then the kind of dropping off can be an issue. Like people, being in a hurry and then not parking super appropriately, right? Like you probably maybe seen on social media, like images of scooters being strewn about and things like this. And there have been some kind of like, there's been some good research out of Virginia Tech recently kind of showing that when you institute parking requirements, so say if you have a geofenced parking corral, not even like a traditional kind of parking scenario, but just an area where you park, ridership drops off really dramatically because it's not that same value proposition of just being able to kind of ride up to where you want to go and kind of get off quickly. And so I think there's a really interesting set of problems around this. Like it's kind of relates to Karen's earlier point about like convenience at all costs is not, it doesn't work if you're thinking in a kind of community centered mindset and not just an individual mindset, individual kind of consumer convenience mindset. And so like, how do you balance the benefits of kind of these newer mobility technologies while also recognizing that other people need to use the sidewalk and it still needs to be available to a variety of different kind of pedestrians and mobility devices and so on and so forth. So I think maybe the role that retailers could play and just kind of thinking out loud about this is helping to kind of set up social norms around this and like maybe hosting a parking corral in front of their business or something like this, right? So kind of boosting visibility and encouraging that kind of more pro-social behavior.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think so. It's always the discussions around scooters and bikes. There's few topics that can elicit the level of passion in discussions than conversations around scooters and bikes. This is 120 years after we've sort of all of society changed with the advent of the automobile, and we no longer we sort of accept that as being just a norm, and focus a lot more attention on these newcomers, while we still have lots of antisocial behavior, attributed to um, automobiles. I think there's a lot of hope, I think, with emerging mobility technology. I'm really excited for the next decade of what will happen here. Um, even in a city like Pittsburgh, some 70% of household trips are taken in an automobile. It's frankly, it's deeply troubling.
And aren't they
Um,
also within like 2 miles or something, like super
50%
far?
of trips are less than
Yeah.
3 miles in distance. So the vast majority of them are very short distance trips, but they're still taken in a full size 3,000 pound vehicle, generally carrying just one person. However, that vehicle is much more inclusive. It protects you from the weather. Persons of strong, large span of abilities are able to use that device. So it's understandable that bicycles and scooters are exclusionary in their design. You have to possess a certain ability, and they generally only carry one person, as previously mentioned. Where a lot of trips are taken with a caregiver and either an older adult or a younger person. You have packages, there's weather, there's other kinds of things. I think the next 10 years, we'll see a whole slew of emerging form factors for both deliveries and passengers. And we'll need to be ready to, and I think it will cause as many passions as the advent of these smaller devices have caused. Pittsburgh was the second city that UPS deployed the use of a truck trike, a electric truck, to deliver their goods in our central business district, second only to Portland, Oregon. They quickly took that back or stopped that service, in part because those devices don't fit the motor vehicle code classification of a bicycle. They're too heavy. Even though they travel at a very low speed, I think most people can agree that that's a preferable thing than a full-size UPS truck blocking lanes. But they don't fit the code to use a bike lane. What happens when we start seeing electric tuk-tuks or three-seaters or enclosed heated golf cart type vehicles, autonomous or not, operating in our cities? These are low-speed, ultra lightweight vehicles that are very common around the globe for the delivery of persons and passengers, passengers and packages. But our policies and codes are not set up to deal with that. So we are handicapping ourselves. We are driving ourselves toward continuing use of very heavy, very large, very dangerous vehicles that contribute to our roadway deaths. As we go electric, these vehicles will use an inordinate amount of rare earth materials for very short trips for which they don't need a full-size battery. So I'll stop there, but I'm excited about the possibility of the next 10 years, and we need to get on the stick and start dealing with these policy changes and the use cases of how we're going to permit and enable the use of these more inclusive, lighter weight, I would argue safer and preferable vehicles that can finally help us swing that pendulum back from full-size automobile traffic to these more ultra lightweight passenger and delivery vehicles.
Yeah, I absolutely, I agree. And I think what's exciting too is there's an opportunity for not just municipalities to set the policies, but employers can set those policies. They can have a transportation demand management program that encourages people to use different types of modalities, intermodal, multimodal, shuttles, and it doesn't have to be single occupancy vehicles. I think we're seeing it in some communities. I think the pandemic put a kibosh in a lot of this. But there's still a need because, if this idea that people are, even with, we talk about autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles, if we're just perpetuating the use of single occupancy vehicles, this is, again, it's an untenable situation. And so from a policy perspective, from an employer's side, as well as a policy, municipal side, I think there's opportunities for improvement and innovation.
I would say just one other thing I would be remiss if I did not mention. I think we should have a yes and attitude, right? So it cannot mean divestment from traditional forms of public transit. Those are necessary, and many people depend on them. They're the reason that essential workers could continue to work during the pandemic, right? So yeah, I think we have to have these more traditional forms that are the kind of lifeblood of our communities as well.
A lot of what I'm hearing is retailers, small, large, would really benefit from on both issues, delivery and employee mobility, is to both get involved in federal, state, local, different kind of policy setting and legislation to ensure that the people that are trying to innovate in these areas have pathways to do that. And also ensuring that they have their own policies to support. I mean, I think one of the greatest things I love about CMU is like everybody gets a free bus pass and that supports the PAT bus system. What if all employers gave everybody a free bus pass that supported the PAT bus system? I don't think we'd have as many problems with the PAT bus system, right? If all of our large employers in Pittsburgh did that, it would encourage use of it. So that's just a very simple policy that could be enacted. We don't have a lot of time left, so I'm not going to switch to our third question because that could open up a whole Pandora's box. So in the couple of minutes that we have left, I'm going to kind of let it up to each of the three of you to maybe just leave a parting thought of if you were sitting down with, a large national retailer and they were asking you, what is one thing I could do to either help delivery or employee transportation? What should I do? And I'll start with you, Sarah.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think one thing that feels like a refrain in our conversation across all of the responses is kind of taking a kind of community-centered mindset to much of this. So not just thinking, even in the question of like interoperability, I think Karen, you raised, is like, if we take a kind of one organization-centered view, or kind of servicing our customers, then we lose sight of the ways in which our walkways and our roadways may be clogged, the kind of emissions impacts of that, the kind of quality of life impacts of that, and kind of all of that can deteriorate a community in different ways. And so, as we look forward, I think it's really critical to kind of look beyond just our kind of individual, like kind of business and our consumer that we may be interfacing with on a regular basis, to the broader community, and think about kind of responsibility much more kind of evenly across the board.
Yes, and I think the way to do that is also start locally or start with your community business organization. There's a lot of groups that are in your neighborhood, that are in your community. So there are opportunities. You're not alone. There's a lot of organizations that are in a similar situation. So find partners and find audiences. I know here at Carnegie Mellon, we'd love to talk to you. There are national associations. So I think this is something where the retailers and the industry should step forward. Don't wait for government to regulate it. I think it's really important that you step forward and affect that change yourselves.
Yeah, I would just, I guess, add to that is taking the long view, the very long view, right? This is not sustainable to have every individual package delivered to your front step, an hour after you have ordered it. It is not sustainable to have a parking spot for each and every employee for them to arrive there. It's not sustainable to have 50-mile commutes to get to places. So we do need businesses to take I understand that, you know, there's the immediate pressures of profitability and viability, but need them to participate also in these longer view notions of sustainability and can we think about circular economies? Can we think about you know, economies of scale in terms of our employee commutes as well, and making those just if you are able to achieve sustainability, you are probably, by the way, reducing costs ultimately to yourself and increasing profits. So thinking about that as well as we think about these different kinds of technology deployed in service to retail and service.
Thank you, Karina. I want to thank all of you. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up since we're at the hour. I'm going to go back and share our slide with some more information. So thank you all three, Karina, Karen, and Sarah, for your time today. I think this was a great discussion. I think there are a lot of ways retailers and service providers can get involved. And as you can see here, a lot of collaboration with Carnegie Mellon through ENAiBLE. So if you have any questions or want to connect with one of the panelists about how to get involved and become part of these conversations, that's why ENAiBLE is here. So if you're interested in learning more about opportunities to engage with our panelists today, a good single point of contact is Chris Kissel at ENAiBLE. It's on the screen here, enable@cmu.edu. He can help make those connections. And we do want to encourage you to be a sponsor of ENAiBLE. Sponsoring is one of the deepest ways to participate in our community of technology and design innovators and to help us continue to bring webinars like this and other educational programs that we have to make that connection between retailers, service providers, and the university and these types of projects. So you can also reach out to Chris for that. All right. And thank you everyone again for coming today. I want to thank everyone who's helped with this event, including Laura Alford, Chris Kissel, and our panelists, Karina Ricks, Karen Lightman, and Sarah Fox. So all the best. Goodbye, everybody.